All right, joke time. There's an old story told by Jewish bubbies, and the story concerns a man by the name of Eleazar, who was a Jew who lived during the Roman occupation of Jerusalem around 100 BC. Eleazar, a man who lived a long and fulfilling life, finds himself before the gates of heaven, ready to meet his Maker. As he gazed up at the beautiful sight, he is stopped by the patriarch Abraham, who tells him that to meet the Almighty, he must be worthy of the honor and must recount an instance during his life when he demonstrated great bravery. Eleazar thinks for a moment and then relates that once he found himself standing before the Roman emperor. Abraham was listening intently. "Go on," he urged Eleazar. Eleazar smiled before continuing. "I looked him right in the eye and told him that he was a camel's behind, an oppressor of the Jews of Jerusalem, and then I spat in his face." Abraham is very impressed. "When did that occur?" he asks. Eleazar said, "About 10 seconds ago." Guess it didn't go so well for him, but at least he was brave, right? It was interesting because I think pervasive throughout this entire Torah portion this week is the notion of leadership. What does it mean in this world, whether it be in a religious context or even a secular one, to be a good leader? What does it mean to be a bad leader? And is there a blurring of those lines somewhere along the way? And as I was driving, where was I driving? I was driving to the garden center yesterday, and I went past the Arby's, and on their marquee out front it said, "Now hiring big leaders." Not sure what big leaders mean, if that's a reference to stature or girth, maybe. I don't know. But it did say, "Now hiring big leaders," and I thought, well, there's a sign. I'm talking about leadership anyway. So what does it mean to be a big leader? As we've seen in the last couple of, it is a sign, in many ways. As we've seen in both of the previous Torah portions, Vayetze and Va'era, leadership is all too often a fickle friend. In the end, it is not the failure of leadership that marks the measure of an exceptional leader. It's the recovery from that failure. Leaders can fail for many different reasons, although there are two reasons that seem to outweigh the others. The first is external. The time may not be right. The conditions may be unfavorable. There may be no one on the other side to provide a sounding board with whom communication is possible. Machiavelli called this fortuna, a little Italian word describing the power of bad luck that can defeat even the greatest individual. I may be Irish, but I do not believe in luck, good or bad. Nor do I believe that there are any coincidences when it comes to the things of God. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, we fail. Such is life. Many of us would probably be willing to concede that the Almighty has His hand in all of our failures. These failures have the potential to make us grow in more ways than we can imagine. Without them, our spiritual growth may well be stunted or brought to a standstill. The second kind of failure is internal. A leader can simply lack the courage to lead. Sometimes leaders must oppose the popular opinion of the masses. They have to say no when everyone else is crying yes. That can be terrifying. Crowds have a will and a momentum of their own. To say no could place your career or even your life at risk. That is when courage is needed most, and not showing it can constitute a moral failure of the worst kind. The classic example in the Bible is King Saul, who failed to carry out Samuel's instructions in his battle against the Amalekites. Saul was told to spare no one and nothing. Do you recall what happened? We can read a little from 1 Samuel 15. When Samuel reached him, Saul said, and this is starting in verse 13, "May you be pleased by the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord." But Samuel said this in response, What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears and this lowing of cattle that I hear? Saul answered in verse 15, The soldiers have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but the rest we have utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said to Saul, Stop, I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night. He replied, Speak. What comes next is fascinating. Listen to this. Samuel said, Though you are little in your own eyes, are you not the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and said, Go, utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do what was evil in the sight of the Lord? Saul says to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I have gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me. I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But from the spoil the people took sheep and cattle, the best of the things devoted to destruction. Why? To sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. So what happened here? Something we so often see in leaders. Saul makes excuses, a bunch of them. The failure was not his, he said. It was the fault of his soldiers. Besides which, he and they had the best of intentions. The sheep and cattle were spared to offer as sacrifices. Saul did not kill King Agag, but brought him back as a prisoner. Samuel, of course, is unmoved. Ready for his sharp response? This is verses 22 and 23. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obedience to the voice of the Lord? Surely to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is no less a sin than divination, and stubbornness is like iniquity and idolatry. And here's the really cringy part. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. Ouch. It is only then that Saul admits this. I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. By this point, it was too late. He had proven himself unworthy to begin the lineage of the kings of Israel. Remember, there's much debate about whether Israel was supposed to have kings in the first place. Did Saul lead, or did he follow? There's a quote attributed to several politicians. Of course I follow the party. After all, I am their leader. There are leaders who follow instead of leading. One rabbi compared them to a dog taking a walk with its owner. The dog runs on ahead, but it keeps turning around to see whether it is going in the right direction. The dog may think it is leading, but in actuality it is following. That, on a plain reading of the text, was the fate of Aaron in this week's Parsha. Moshe had been up to the mountain for 40 days. The people were afraid. Had he died? Was he coming back? Where was he? Without Moses, they felt bereft. He was their point of contact with the Holy One. He performed the miracles. He divided the sea. He gave them water to drink and food to eat. This is how the Torah describes what happened next. This is Exodus 32, 1 through 4. When the people saw that Moshe delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. Aaron said to them, Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took these from them, formed them in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. Then they said, notice Aaron did this. These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Following this, God becomes angry. Moshe pleads with him to spare the people. He then descends the mountain, sees what has happened, smashes the tablets of the law he has brought down with him, burns the idol, grinds it to a powder, mixes it with water, and makes the Israelites drink it. I don't know about you, but I think I'll stick with coffee. He then turns to Aaron, his brother, and asks him what happened. Aaron's reply is very telling. This is verses 22 through 24. Do not let the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, that they are wicked. They said to me, make gods for us, who shall go before us. And as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So I said to them, whoever has gold, take it off. And so they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. Aaron blames the people. He makes excuses, lots of them. It was they who made the illegitimate request, he contends. He denies responsibility for making the calf, even though it said he formed it with his own hands. It just happened. I threw it in the fire, and out popped this calf. This is the same sort of denial of responsibility we recall from the story of Adam and Eve. The man says, it was the woman. The woman says, it was the serpent. It was not me. I was the victim, not the perpetrator. You know Judge Judy? Some years ago, she published a book sort of based on her long decades in family court about how everybody that was brought before her made excuses. And she mentions this one teenage girl who was on a subway train in New York and ended up stabbing a woman so that she could have her jewelry, because the woman wouldn't give her her jewelry. So when this woman was brought before Judge Judy, the attorneys made every excuse in the world. Well, it was the fault of the parents because they were drug addicts and didn't get the help and money they needed. Well, it was the fault of the school systems for failing to have after-school programs that would have helped mold this young woman. It was the fault of this woman who was the victim because she sat on a train and was displaying jewelry which would have been desirous for others. Nowhere was it ever the fault of the young girl who stabbed the person. Anyway, she ended up writing a book that was called Don't Pee on My Leg and Tell Me It's Raining, which I think is appropriate in this world of excuses, right? No one takes responsibility for their own actions. They make excuses. They blame everyone else. They're the victim. In anyone, such evasion is a moral failure. In a leader such as Saul, the king of Israel, and Aaron, the high priest, all the more so. The odd fact is that Aaron was not immediately punished. According to the Torah, he was condemned for another sin altogether, when years later he and Moses spoke angrily against the people complaining about lack of water. Numbers 20:24 says, Let Aaron be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land that I have given to the Israelites, because they rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. It was only later still, in the last month of Moshe's life, that Moshe told the people a fact that he had kept from them up until this point. This is Deuteronomy 9:19 through 20. For I was afraid that the anger that the Lord bore against you was so fierce that he would destroy you. But the Lord listened to me also that time. The Lord was so angry with Aaron that he was ready to destroy him. But I interceded also on behalf of Aaron at that same time. Hashem, according to Moshe, was so angry with Aaron for the sin of the golden calf that he was about to kill him, and would have done so if it hadn't been for Moses' prayer of intercession. It's easy to be critical of people who fail the leadership test when it involves opposing the crowd, defying the consensus, blocking the path that the majority are intent on taking. The truth is that it is hard to oppose the majority. It's hard to take a moral stand when so many hostile eyes are staring back at you from the crowd. They can ignore you, they can remove you, they can even assassinate you. When a crowd gets out of control, there's no elegant solution. Even Moshe was helpless in the face of the people's demands during the later episode of the spies that we read in Numbers 14. Nor was it easy for Moses to restore order He did so with the most dramatic of acts, smashing the tablets, grinding them to dust. He then asked for support and was given to it by his fellow Levites. In the end, they took reprisals against the crowd, killing 3,000 people on that day. History judges Moses a hero, but he might well have been seen by his contemporaries as a brutal autocrat. We, thanks to the Torah, know what passed between God and Moses at that time. The Israelites at the foot of the mountain knew nothing of how close they had come to being utterly destroyed. Tradition dealt kindly with Aaron. He is portrayed as a man of peace. Perhaps that is why he was made high priest. There is more than one kind of leadership, and priesthood involves following rules, not taking stands and swaying crowds. The fact that Aaron was not a leader in the same mold as Moshe does not mean that he was a failure. It means that he was made for a different kind of role. There are times when you need someone with the courage to stand against the crowd. Others when you need a peacemaker. Moses and Aaron were different types. Aaron failed when he was called on to be a Moses, but he became a great leader in his own right in a different capacity. And as two different leaders working together, Aaron and Moshe complemented one another. Different styles of leadership for different times. Good leaders know when to approach a situation with a gentle spirit or a heavy hand. Matthew says a leader must serve, and Paul in 1 Timothy says that a leader must rule. Matthew says that a leader must be abundantly confident, but James tells us that a leader must be exceedingly humble. Mark teaches us that a leader must be a man of action, but Luke teaches us that a leader must be a man of prayer. Luke says a leader must have a strategy, and James says a leader must submit to God's will. No one person can do everything. The truth is that when a crowd runs out of control, there's no easy answer. That's why the whole of our faith as believers is an extended lesson in individual and collective responsibility. We do not or should not form crowds. When we do, it may take a Moses to restore order, but it may take an Aaron at other times to maintain the peace. Every year at this time in congregations around the world, as we did this past week, Jews and others gather to read about Esther and Mordecai, who worked for King Ahasuerus. Mordecai took in Esther as his own daughter after her parents passed away. He brought her to the palace. Esther pleased the king, and he made her his queen. Meanwhile, that guy whose name begins with the letter H, he who must not be named, a leader in the king's court, became angry with Mordecai because he would not pay obeisance to him. Therefore, the H guy plotted to destroy Mordecai and all the Jews. Realizing the grave danger which loomed over his people, Mordecai pled with Esther to seek help from the king. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. Consider Esther's dilemma. It was against the law to approach the king without being summoned. Such an act was punishable by death. If she were to remain quiet, she would likely enjoy a life of luxury and ease. She could live the life of a queen or risk her life to save her family and her people. She counted the cost and chose to heed the longings of her people and of her heart. She asked Mordecai to gather all the Jews in Shushan and fast 3 days for her, and she and her handmaids would do the same. Then she said, "After that I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Spiritually prepared, Esther approached the king. She was received by him, and she invited the king and the H guy to a feast she had arranged. During the feast, his plot was unveiled, and Mordecai received great honors. Esther, born for such a time, had saved a nation. When you think of the billions of people who were born throughout the history of the world, have you ever wondered why you were born at this particular time? Despite the great challenges we individually and collectively face today, I'm sure you will agree this is a wonderful time to be alive. In the context of world history, there has never been a more exciting time, probably, to sojourn on the earth, although it's easy for us to look back in the past and romanticize it, I think, and think, oh, things were so simple then. And some things probably were, while others were more difficult. So it's a kind of an exchange. Each of you are called upon to lead in some way, whether it be in your families, your job, your capacity here at Beit Tikva, even your own affairs and conduct. Each of you is loved and important. Each of you are seen by the living God, and He has a plan for you that will bring you closer to Him if you follow His voice and heed His commandments, to lead or to follow. Perhaps it was always meant to be both. I once read a story of a young woman who wanted to go to college, but her heart sank when she read a question on the application that asked, "Are you a leader?" Being both honest and conscientious, she wrote no and returned the application expecting the worst. To her surprise, she received this letter from the college. "Dear applicant, a study of the application forms reveals that this year our college will have 1,452 new leaders. We are accepting you because we feel it is imperative that they have at least one follower." There are times for all of us to lead in various roles and ways in our life. But sometimes we become so focused on leadership or the desire to be right that we forget our first responsibility is to be followers of Messiah. The first command that He gave to His disciples was to follow Him, and the same is true for us. Eventually, He told them, "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations." First to follow, then to lead. Simply put, there is no way to be a great leader in any capacity without first walking in the footsteps of the Master. And it is my prayer that we can do so with humility and love and discernment and wisdom. And I say this in Yeshua's name. Amen. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, complaints? Maybe, maybe not.
Or jokes.
Or jokes?
It's kind of interesting that your subject today came up this week at work. I've applied for another job at the railroad, and it's a step up in more management style. And so the question, first of all, on the application was, are you a supervisor? And have you supervised people for the last couple of years? Technically, in my position, I supervise no one in my current one. And I haven't for 17 plus years. So it kind of discouraged me. There was another qualification of 8 years of sales experience. My job, current job, I have no direct sales experience. So I talked to my boss, and my boss goes, "Well, let me tell you something. You actually supervise people in doing their operating budget, so that qualifies. You've done that. Oh, by the way, you also support the sales group, sales and marketing group, and you're working behind the scenes, establishing rates and all that. So you qualify for that. You've hit at least 85%. So it's like yes on both of those." Fast forward to this week, I had the interview, and one of the questions is, what management style do you have? And it was kind of an interesting question, and I gave an answer. And then there was another question was, how would you deal with a difficult situation where there's conflict between the customer, your department, and an internal department? Kind of a loaded question. So I gave an answer, and they kind of both nodded, and everybody was there. And who knows how I did? I will find out next week. But the act of leadership, and it's one thing that we're kind of struggling with at the railroad, at the senior level, and we'll just leave that at that. And we could use leaders that actually listened to people and took their responsibility.
I like that. Matthew has something to say.
So I have a funny joke, Matthew's saying, okay. So you know the word, you're talking about leadership, right? Okay. God looked down on the earth and he sees America. And the government has the Democratic Party, right? And the Republican Party. So notice the animal represented the donkey and the elephant. Listen to the lamb. Listen to the lamb, not to the donkey or to the elephant.
There you
Listen
go.
to the lamb.
I like that.
Yes. There you go. Yeah. Everybody, yeah. Let's do it.
Say that again?
Don't forget announcements.
Oh, announcements, the thing I always forget.
Without our violinist here, we are just off kilter.
Apparently so. I don't know if I have an announcement. I think next week is one of our start late days. No, I'm just trying to think if I had any myself, now that you mentioned announcements. Next week is a late start.
You said the next 2 weeks?
So as many people as can be here by 4:30.